The man my father framed looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't blame you. I wish he did. It would be easier than this grace I don't deserve." Posted to r/true off my chest. I, 41M, need to tell someone this story because I can't carry it alone anymore. What I'm about to share has destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family, my career, and myself. I'm writing this because I need to process it, and because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear that doing the right thing doesn't always feel like victory. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter that ended my life as I knew it. The letter. It arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope, return address from a law firm I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away thinking it was junk mail or some class action lawsuit notification. I wish I had thrown it away. I wish I'd never opened it. The letter was formal, written in that cold legal language that strips humanity from everything it touches. It informed me that a man, I won't use his name to protect his privacy, was being released from state prison after serving 22 years for a murder conviction that was being vacated. New DNA evidence had conclusively proven his innocence. The real killer had been identified through genetic genealogy, a man who had died in 2019, never facing justice for his crime. But that wasn't why the letter was sent to me. The letter went on to explain that during the investigation into the wrongful conviction, evidence had emerged implicating the lead detective on the original case in serious prosecutorial misconduct. Evidence fabrication. Witness coercion. Deliberate suppression of exculpatory information. The lead detective was my father. My father, who died 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer. My father, who received a full honors funeral with hundreds of officers in attendance. My father, whose flag-draped coffin I helped carry to its final resting place. My father, whose eulogy I delivered to a crowd of weeping colleagues, family members, and community leaders who called him a hero. I gave the eulogy at his funeral. I called him a hero. I said he dedicated his life to justice. I had no idea he was the reason an innocent man was rotting in prison while I spoke those words. The letter requested a meeting with me. Not to accuse me of anything, they made that clear. But because the exonerated man wanted to meet the detective's son. Wanted to look in the eyes of someone connected to the man who stole 22 years of his life. I read that letter 17 times. I know because I counted. Each time, I kept hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Something that didn't shatter every foundation my life was built upon. They never did. Update 1. The investigation. I couldn't just accept the letter's claims. I needed to see for myself. I needed to understand what my father had done, and more importantly, whether he had really done it deliberately or if this was some kind of tragic mistake. I'm a public defender. Have been for 15 years. I chose this career specifically because of my father. He used to tell me stories about the cases he solved, the victims he helped, the justice he delivered. I wanted to be part of that system. I wanted to serve justice like he did. When I couldn't become a cop myself, bad eyesight kept me out of the academy, I went to law school instead. I figured I could fight for the innocent from the courtroom instead of the streets. The irony of that choice burns like acid now. I used my connections to get access to the investigation files. What I found made me physically sick. I had to leave my office twice to vomit in the bathroom. And I've seen crime scene photos that would make most people faint. The original case happened in 1999. A young woman was found murdered in her apartment. The community was terrified. There was immense pressure on the police department to solve it quickly. My father was a patrol officer at the time, hungry for advancement, and he volunteered to assist the detective division. The man who would spend the next 22 years in prison was a maintenance worker in the victim's building. He was 24 years old. He had no criminal record. He had an alibi. He was at his second job across town during the time of the murder. But his alibi was his word against the timeline the police constructed. Here's what my father did. First, he found a piece of jewelry belonging to the victim in the maintenance worker's locker. The investigation notes show that other officers had already searched that locker and found nothing. My father searched it again, alone, and miraculously discovered the evidence. The jewelry was later proven to have been taken from the evidence room, where my father had access. Second, he interrogated the suspect for 14 hours without a lawyer present. The interrogation wasn't recorded. This was before mandatory recording was standard. But witnesses from neighboring cells heard screaming. The confession that emerged was riddled with factual errors, details about the crime that didn't match the evidence. My father claimed the suspect was playing dumb to establish reasonable doubt. Third, and this is what breaks me, there were leads pointing to another suspect. A man with a history of violence against women who lived 3 blocks from the victim. My father interviewed him once, noted in his report that the man had no alibi, And then, nothing. He never followed up. He buried those notes in a file that wasn't discovered until decades later. The DNA evidence that eventually exonerated the innocent man came from under the victim's fingernails. She had scratched her attacker. That DNA sat in an evidence locker for over 2 decades because my father had written in his report that it was compromised and not suitable for testing. It was never compromised. It was perfectly preserved. He lied. He knew. My father knew the man was innocent. He knew there was another suspect. He knew the confession was coerced and the evidence was planted. And he did it anyway. The man he framed is 46 years old and has nothing. No career. No family. No memories of freedom for 22 years. My father took all of that so he could get a promotion. And he got that promotion. The case made his career. He became a detective. He rose through the ranks. He was celebrated. He was honored. He was my hero. Update 2. The confrontation with my mother. I drove to my mother's house the day after I finished reading the files. I didn't call ahead. I couldn't. I needed to see her face when I asked her about this. She opened the door with a smile that faded the moment she saw my expression. I think she knew, even before I said anything. Maybe she'd been waiting for this moment for 25 years. You know, I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. She just stepped aside to let me in, and suddenly I understood everything about my childhood that had never quite made sense. The way she sometimes looked at my father with something that wasn't quite love. The arguments I'd hear late at night that would stop the moment I appeared. The way she'd change the subject whenever someone brought up his most famous case. She knew. She'd known for years. He told me a year after it happened, she said, sitting across from me in the living room where I'd celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone of my life. He was drunk. He cried. He said it was eating him alive. But then he sobered up and made me swear to never speak of it again. He said it would destroy our family. It's destroying our family right now, I said. My mother says, he was a good father to you. As if that erases what he did. As if being good to me makes up for destroying someone else's life. She begged me not to dig deeper. She said I was tarnishing the memory of a man who loved me, who raised me, who gave me everything. She asked me to think about what going public would do to her, a widow who had already lost her husband, now being asked to lose his legacy too. Think about the pension, she said at one point, and I felt something inside me turn to ice. The pension. His survivor benefits. The money that comes from the department every month, honoring his years of service. She was worried about the money. An innocent man lost 22 years of his life, I said. He went in at 24. He's coming out at 46. He missed his entire youth. His mother died while he was inside. He didn't get to hold her hand or say goodbye. His fiancée married someone else. He has nothing. And you're worried about a pension. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Like I was the one who didn't understand. Your father was a complicated man, she said. He made a mistake. One mistake. Everything else he did. It wasn't a mistake, I interrupted. I've seen the files. He planned it. He covered it up. He knew exactly what he was doing. He chose his career over another man's life, and he never looked back. She asked me to leave after that. I haven't spoken to her since. Update 3. The meeting. I agreed to meet the exonerated man. I had to. I couldn't hide from what my father did, even if I wanted to. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. His lawyer was there, along with an advocate from an innocence project who had worked on his case. They were protective of him, watching me like I might be there to cause more harm. I understood. I probably would have done the same. He looked older than 46. Prison ages you. I've seen it in my own clients. The way incarceration carves years into faces, steals the youth from eyes that should still hold hope. His hair was gray. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee. But his gaze was steady, clear, and devastatingly calm. I had prepared a speech. I'd written it out, rehearsed it, tried to find the words that could somehow acknowledge the magnitude of what my father had done without sounding hollow or performative. But when I sat across from him, all those words evaporated. "I'm sorry," was all I could say. "I'm so sorry for what he did to you." He looked me in the eyes at that meeting, the man my father destroyed, and he said, "I don't blame you. I wish he did. It would be easier than this grace I don't deserve." He told me about his life. The life he'd had before. He'd been engaged. He'd been about to start his own maintenance business. He'd been saving for a house. He'd had friends, family, dreams. All of it gone. Erased by a lie my father told for a promotion. He told me about prison. The violence. The isolation. The way time moves differently inside, each day stretching into infinity while the years somehow slip past unnoticed. He told me about learning that his mother had cancer, begging for compassionate release to see her one last time, and being denied. She died alone. He found out 3 days later through a letter from his sister. He told me about hope, how he'd had to abandon it to survive. How believing he might one day be free was too painful, so he'd learned to accept that he would die in prison. How the news of his exoneration hadn't brought joy at first, just numbness. The joy came later, in small moments. The taste of coffee that wasn't from a prison commissary. The feeling of grass under his feet. The sound of birds in the morning, unmuffled by concrete walls. I became a public defender to fight for justice. My whole career was inspired by a man who manufactured injustice. Everything I believed about myself is a lie. Before we parted, he put his hand on my shoulder. I think I flinched. I know I didn't deserve the gesture. "You're not your father," he said. "What you do next, that's who you are." I cried in my car for an hour after that meeting. I don't think I'd cried since my father's funeral. Update 4. The decision. I spent 2 weeks wrestling with what to do. The easy choice was to do nothing. My father was dead. He couldn't be prosecuted. The man was being released anyway. The truth would come out in the civil lawsuit, but I could stay silent, let it happen without my involvement, protect what remained of my family. But I kept thinking about that man's mother, dying alone while her son sat in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. I kept thinking about his fiancée, the life they should have had together. I kept thinking about 22 years of birthday candles never blown out, Thanksgivings never celebrated, simple mornings never enjoyed. And I kept thinking about all the people in my town who still thought of my father as a hero. The plaque at the police station with his name on it. The scholarship in his honor at the local high school. The way people still stopped my mother at the grocery store to tell her what a great man her husband was. I couldn't let that stand. I couldn't let a lie be his legacy while a man he destroyed tried to rebuild his life. I decided to go public. I contacted a journalist who covers criminal justice issues. I gave her everything, the files, my own investigation, my mother's confirmation that she'd known for years. I agreed to go on record, to put my name next to my accusations, to stand in public and tell the world that my father was not a hero. He was a monster who wore a badge. The story ran on a Sunday. By Monday, my phone had exploded. Some people called me brave. Others called me a traitor. My extended family largely fell into the second category. An uncle told me I'd pissed on my father's grave. A cousin called me an attention-seeking piece of garbage, who was probably making it all up for fame. My mother released a statement through an attorney calling my claims unsubstantiated, and saying I was clearly suffering from grief and mental health issues. The police union condemned my father's actions but also condemned me for trying to tarnish the reputation of law enforcement. I got death threats. Someone keyed my car. A former colleague of my father's found my home address and stood outside my house at 3 a.m., just watching. The police I called about it seemed less than enthusiastic about helping. But I also got other calls. From Innocence Project organizations wanting to honor my courage. From other families of wrongfully convicted individuals who said my story helped them feel less alone. From journalists working on other cases involving police misconduct who wanted to talk about the systemic issues that enabled my father's corruption. And I got a call from the exonerated man himself. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do that. Nobody from that family has ever acknowledged what was done to me. You're the first." I didn't know what to say. I still don't know if I did enough. There's no amount of acknowledgement that can give him back 22 years. Update 5. The aftermath. It's been 3 months since the story broke. I want to tell you that everything worked out, that justice was served, that I feel at peace. But this isn't that kind of story. This is real life, and real life is messier than narratives. The city settled the civil lawsuit for an amount I can't disclose. It was substantial, not enough to buy back 22 years, because nothing could ever be enough for that, but enough to give the man financial security for the rest of his life. Enough to let him start over without worrying about where his next meal will come from. I testified in the deposition. I handed over everything I had. The city's lawyers tried to discredit me, but the evidence was overwhelming. My father's plaque was removed from the police station. Quietly, without announcement, I only found out because a sympathetic officer texted me a photo of the empty wall. The scholarship in his name was disbanded, and the remaining funds were donated to an innocence project. His case files are being reviewed to identify any other potential wrongful convictions. So far, they found 2 more cases with significant irregularities. 2 more lives potentially destroyed by his ambition. My mother still won't speak to me. She's living with my aunt now, surrounded by family members who've chosen to remember my father the way they want to remember him. I understand, in a way. It's easier to believe a comfortable lie than to accept a devastating truth. I lived in that comfortable lie for 41 years. I know how warm it feels. I've lost most of my extended family. The few who still talk to me do so carefully, like they're handling something fragile or dangerous. Holiday gatherings are no longer an option. The community I grew up in, the one that celebrated my father for decades, looks at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I'm the son who betrayed his father's memory. The traitor. The rat. But I've gained something too. A clarity I never had before. An understanding of what justice actually means, not the performative kind my father embraced, but the real kind. The messy, painful, costly kind that doesn't feel like victory even when it is. I'm still a public defender. Some days it's harder than before, knowing that my entire career was built on a lie about who my father was. But then I sit with a client who's been wrongly accused, who's terrified and alone, who just needs someone to believe them, and I remember why I do this. Not because of my father. In spite of him, the exonerated man and I have kept in touch. He's taking it one day at a time, which is all anyone can do. He's reconnected with his sister. He's started therapy. He's learning to drive again. He never got his license before he went in, and now he's navigating roads that have changed dramatically in 22 years. He's learning to use a smartphone, to navigate a world that moved on without him, to be a person instead of a prisoner. He told me recently that he's forgiven my father. Not for my father's sake. My father is beyond the reach of forgiveness or punishment now, but for his own. He said carrying that hatred was like drinking poison and waiting for a dead man to die. He had to let it go to survive. I haven't gotten there yet. I don't know if I ever will. How do you forgive someone who shaped everything you are while simultaneously being the thing you've spent your career fighting against? How do you reconcile the father who taught you to ride a bike with the man who planted evidence to frame an innocent person? How do you mourn someone you loved when you've discovered they were capable of such deliberate cruelty? I don't have answers. I'm not sure there are any. All I have is the next day, and the day after that, and the choice to keep trying to do what's right even when it costs me everything. Some people have called what I did brave. I don't feel brave. I feel broken. I feel like I'm walking through the rubble of everything I used to believe, picking up pieces and trying to figure out what's worth keeping and what was always rotten beneath the surface. But when I think about that man, the one who lost 22 years to my father's ambition, I know I made the right choice. He spent over 2 decades in prison for something he didn't do, and when he came out, the first thing he encountered from my family was someone who finally told the truth. Someone who acknowledged what was done to him. Someone who chose his suffering over a comfortable legacy. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. And sometimes, something is all we can give. Final thoughts. I started this story by saying I needed to tell someone. But I think what I really needed was to understand it myself. To write it down, to see it on a screen, to make it real in a way that my mind still resists. My father was not who I thought he was. The man I eulogized, the man I admired, the man I built my entire career trying to emulate. He was capable of destroying an innocent life for professional advancement. He made that choice deliberately. He lived with it for over 2 decades. He died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by family, honored by his community, never facing a single consequence for what he did. There's no cosmic justice that balances those scales. The innocent man can never get his years back. My father will never face punishment. All that's left is the truth, ugly and painful and incomplete as it is. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not the hero's son. That identity was built on a lie. I'm something new now, something still forming. Maybe I'm the son who tried to make it right. Maybe I'm just the guy who couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent. Maybe I'm both, or neither, or something I don't have words for yet. What I do know is this: the truth matters. Even when it destroys you. Even when it costs you everything. Even when nobody thanks you for it and half the world calls you a traitor. The man my father framed looked me in the eyes and gave me grace I didn't deserve. The least I could do was give him the truth. It's a bitter victory, if you can call it a victory at all. But it's the only kind of victory that was available. And I'll take it. Because in the end, We're not defined by the lies we inherit. We're defined by what we do when we discover them. Edit. Thank you for all the messages. I can't respond to everyone, but I'm reading them. For those asking, yes, I've started therapy. Yes, I'm okay. Or I will be, eventually. One day at a time. For anyone else carrying a family secret, for anyone else who's discovered that someone they loved did something unforgivable, you're not alone. And whatever you decide to do with that knowledge, I hope you find peace. That's all any of us can hope for. Here's what I learned about heroism. Sometimes the cape hides a monster. I gave the eulogy at his funeral. I called him a hero. I said he dedicated his life to justice. I had no idea he was the reason an innocent man was rotting in prison while I spoke those words. My father was a hero cop. Solved the biggest murder case in our town's history. Got promoted. Became detective. Died with full honors, flag on coffin, hundreds of officers in attendance. Then I received a letter. A man was being released after 22 years. DNA proved his innocence. And evidence showed my father fabricated the case against him. He planted evidence. Coerced a confession. Buried leads pointing to the real killer. He knew the man was innocent. Did it anyway for a promotion. The man he framed is 46 years old and has nothing. No career. No family. No memories of freedom for 22 years. My father took all of that so he could get a promotion. His mother died while he was inside. He couldn't hold her hand. His fiancée married someone else. His 20s, 30s, early 40s, gone. Stolen by a lie my father told to advance his career. My mother knew. She's known for years. She begged me not to destroy his memory. She worried about the pension. My mother says, he was a good father to you. As if that erases what he did. As if being good to me makes up for destroying someone else's life. I became a public defender to fight for justice. My whole career was inspired by a man who manufactured injustice. Everything I believed about myself is a lie. I met him, the man my father destroyed. He looked me in the eyes and said, I don't blame you. I wish he did. It would be easier than this grace I don't deserve. He told me, you're not your father. What you do next, that's who you are. I went public. Gave everything to journalists. Testified in the deposition. Destroyed my father's hero legacy. My mother won't speak to me. My family calls me a traitor. Someone keyed my car. Death threats. An officer stood outside my house at 3 a.m. But that man, the one who lost 22 years, he called me. Thank you, he said. Nobody from that family has ever acknowledged what was done to me. The plaque came down. The scholarship was disbanded. 2 more wrongful convictions found in my father's files. It's a bitter victory. My father died peacefully, never facing consequences. The innocent man can never get his years back. All that's left is the truth. We're not defined by the lies we inherit. We're defined by what we do when we discover them.